Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. Cypress Grove Cemetery by night was never a posting I coveted. Its nocturnal embrace paid a premium, $3 more each hour than its sunlit counterpart. Yet traversing those shadowed acres solo resonated with a deep, instinctual wrongness. Still, the wreckage of my marriage demanded recompense, and so I took the solitary vigil. 3 months adrift in that sea of stone, and the reason for its notorious vacancy rate began to unveil itself. It transpired on a Tuesday, deep within October's grip, the air honed to a razor edge that stung the nostrils and numbed the fingertips. 2 o'clock tolled in the silent expanse of morning as my torch carved transient paths across slumbering granite, my footsteps a lonely percussion on the gravel veins winding through the plots. A skeletal half-moon presided, deepening the already profound shadows. Always, the oldest quarter proved most unsettling, its monuments from the 19th century listing like drunken sailors, worn smooth by indifferent time. Restoration whispers never solidified into action. My watch read 2:17, 4 hours, 43 minutes until the reprieve of dawn. The heated sanctuary of the security hut beckoned. One moment, the familiar crunch of gravel underfoot. The next, the unforgiven earth met my face. A violent, two-handed pressure between my shoulder blades had propelled me downward. Yet, scrambling upright, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the beam of my light sliced wildly through empty air. "Who's there?" The question emerged thin, a stranger to my own throat. Only tombstones answered, spectral and silent, amidst the dry rustle of fallen leaves. My back, however, screamed. Not the ache of impact, but an alien heat, as if seared by invisible metal. A tentative hand explored the area, finding only intact fabric, dry skin. No wound, no tear. Just the intensifying, tooth-clenching burn spreading like spilled vitriol beneath the surface. Another frantic sweep of the light confirmed my solitude. The conflagration across my upper back pulsed now, a malevolent tide. I keyed the radio. "Elias, Section C, potential intruder, requesting assistance." Static hissed before Silas's weary drawl crackled back. "Acknowledged. En route. Maintain position." Prudence dictated otherwise. I retreated, step by careful step, until the cold marble of a grandiose monument, some cherubic sentinel guarding the eternal rest of one Beaumont, pressed against my spine. Nothing, at least, could approach unseen from behind. The burning had localized, a persistent, throbbing ember. Silas arrived 5 minutes later, breath pluming in the frigid air. Together, we quartered the section, scrutinizing the soft earth between graves, the skeletal branches overhead. No displaced soil, no snapped twigs, no sign of passage. Nothing. "Perhaps you stumbled," Silas offered, the words lacking conviction, his eyes holding that familiar guarded look. The look of a man long acquainted with the grove's unutterable secrets. Somehow, I navigated the remaining hours, each footfall sending jolts through my afflicted back. Dawn found me staggering into my apartment, barely able to maintain verticality. In the harsh light of the bathroom mirror, shed in my uniform shirt revealed the truth. The flesh between my scapulae was an angry, tumescent red, blossoming with tiny, glistening vesicles. It resembled some horrific thermal injury, yet confined to a precise rectangle, uncannily the dimensions of two pressing hands. That night, I reported ill, surrendering to gravity, prone on my bed, careful that nothing contacted the searing patch. The blisters swelled, taut balloons filled with pellucid lymph gleaming under the artificial light. A physician should have been consulted, certainly. But what explanation could I offer? Assault by apparition? And then they began, fleeting aberrations at the periphery of sight, dissolving upon direct gaze, a silhouette gliding through a doorway in the empty house, the unshakable certainty of being observed. By the third day, the blisters wept and ruptured, leaving behind raw, glistening pink terrain. Concurrently, the shadows gained substance, coalescing in corners, vaguely anthropomorphic, yet distorted, elongated, limbs articulated at impossible junctures. Motionless under scrutiny, they advanced with unnerving subtlety the instant my attention wavered. Day 4 saw my reluctant return to Cypress Grove. Silas appraised my haggard form, a slow shake of his head conveying grim understanding. "You've been claimed," he stated flatly. "Same thing happened to Thorne, drove him off last year." "Claimed? What are you talking about?" He offered no elaboration, merely a caution to remain vigilant and avoid the elder grounds post-midnight, advice rendered tragically moot. The phantoms migrated with me, spectral attendants gliding between the sepulchres, pacing my rounds. Whispers arose, susurrations devoid of language yet skirting the edge of meaning, like voices submerged in deep water. A week post-assault, contact occurred again. I was verifying the locks on the groundskeeper's shed when an icy caress grazed the nape of my neck. Whirling, I confronted it. A presence nearly scraping the sky, 7 feet tall perhaps, a void carved from the night itself. Featureless, utterly black, a mere suggestion of human contour warped by impossible geometry. Reason abandoned me. Flashlight and radio clattered to the ground as I fled, instinct screaming of pursuit, a breathless terror propelling me toward the security booth's fragile light. Silas discovered me there an hour later, trembling, soaked in a cold sweat. "You cannot remain here, Elias," he pronounced, his voice heavy. "Once their attention is caught, it never wavers." "Whose attention? What are they?" "Those who cling," he murmured. "The embittered, the possessive, those who perceive our presence as violation." He sighed, a sound like rustling leaves, and pushed up his sleeve. His forearm bore a constellation of old scars, pale circles like extinguished embers. They claimed me as well, back in '98. One adapts, learns coexistence. Most cannot. That very night, I resigned. My uniform and badge remained on the worn laminate desk, abandoned symbols of a life I could no longer inhabit. Departure, however, offered no sanctuary. They accompanied me. They reside within my walls now, nocturnal sentinels materializing in my bedroom doorway. Sometimes solitary, sometimes a silent congregation of 5 or 6. They do nothing but observe. The brands upon my back subsided to silvery traceries, yet they never truly healed, flaring with phantom heat whenever the umbral figures draw nigh. Relocation proved futile. Stays with acquaintances, a week sequestered in a motel across 2 state lines, yielded no escape. They invariably locate me, forever watching, forever waiting, for what culmination I cannot fathom. Last night marked a terrifying shift, one vocalized, not the familiar subaquatic murmurs but articulated speech. It towered at the foot of my bed, impossibly tall within the room's confines, and uttered my name. Not Elias, the name I adopted, but the one conferred at birth, unheard since boyhood. I commit this account to paper now, recalling Silas's grim foreshadowing. Thorne experienced this same escalation before vanishing utterly. The shadows encroach nightly, their vocalizations increasing, their comprehension of me deepening. Yesterday morning, fine gray ash dusted my pillow, testament to some vigil kept while I slept, shed remnants of their burnt substance. The original scars are propagating, the integument feels taut, stretched unnaturally from within. This morning revealed new vesicles erupting along my vertebrae. These differ from the first, darker, tinged with violet and containing something that shifts, obscurely modal. I dread their bursting. Sleep has become a fragmented luxury, snatched in brief, hour-long increments. To close my eyes for extended periods feels like an invitation. They grow audacious in my unconsciousness. I awaken to fresh stigmata, minute cauterizations on limbs as if they prod and probe my corporeal form. The whispers intensify, verging on intelligibility, yet remaining stubbornly elusive. A mercy, perhaps. The few syllables I have managed to parse induce a visceral ache in my teeth, make my eyes stream uncontrollably. Last night, drawn by some desperate, irrational compulsion, I returned to Cypress Grove. Was it a futile desire for confrontation, a plea for cessation, or merely the terminal stage of sanity's erosion? Silas occupied the security booth, seeming decades older than mere weeks should allow. How much time? The question escaped me, stark in the quiet hum of the office. For you? His gaze was pitying. Not long now. He repeated the gesture, baring his arm. The circular scars had multiplied, creeping past his elbow, coalescing into intricate patterns that radiated a disquieting wrongness, painful to behold. We aren't meant to perceive them, he explained, voice raspy. Not meant to acknowledge their persistence. Once claimed, Elias, the transformation begins. Piece by piece, you become akin. How do I prevent it? A hopeless query. You don't, he confirmed, the finality absolute. The only recourse is documentation. Leave a record so the next unfortunate soul understands the trajectory. And so, this chronicle takes shape, penned while volition remains mine, while these hands retain a semblance of their original form. An hour passed, the new blisters along my spine ruptured. The effluvium was black, viscous, and smoked upon contact with the floorboards. My skin, it feels alien now, impossibly thin in places, elsewhere thick and corrugated. They have assembled as I write. 5 presences, forming a silent semicircle around my desk. I sense their proximity, their non-light falling upon the page, distorting the very act of inscription. Their shadows writhe independently of their static forms, twisting into headache-inducing geometries upon the walls. One just made contact. A shoulder brushed by something frigid, ephemeral, like damp cinders. The characteristic burning now travels down my arm. My fingers tremble, betraying my control. The end of this riding approaches rapidly. Their patience wanes. The whispers escalate into frustrated susurrations, and the shadows expand, devouring the room's light like spilled ink. To any soul who discovers this warning, should you walk the grounds of Cypress Grove or any such consecrated earth and feel an unseen force propel you, flee. Resign your post. Distance yourself utterly. The brands are indelible, their vigilance eternal, and in time they will. The script here devolves, the final words obscured by a smear of dark, ash-like residue, the concluding lines trailing into frantic, illegible marks. Elias Thorne. That's my name, etched now alongside a memory that refuses the quiet erosion of time. 3 weeks have passed since it began, a span both infinitesimal and eternal. I must anchor these recollections to the page, tether them while the echo of her passage still resonates in the air, while the chill she carried remains a phantom touch upon my skin. Perhaps then, this account might find purchase in the realm of belief. The digital clock bled 7:31 a.m. onto the sterile screen. Tuesday. My sanctuary, this early hour office, wrapped in a pre-dawn hush broken only by the building's mechanical sigh and the rhythmic percussion of my own fingers across the keyboard. Then a peripheral shiver, a fluidity where only stillness should be. I looked up. She drifted past my open doorway, a woman sculpted from another era, a dress of deep midnight blue, severely collared, sleeves hugging slender arms, hair coiled tightly, a dark knot against her nape. An echo of the 1890s, perhaps. Yet, stranger still was the faint nimbus clinging to her form, a phosphorescence ill-suited to the flat glare of the overhead fluorescents. A blink, sharp and involuntary. The corridor stretched vacant, mocking my senses. A frantic drumbeat commenced against my ribs. A cold dew pricked my brow. I rose, propelled by disbelief, and peered down the length of the corridor. Nothing but the familiar geometry of gray carpet, bone-white walls, doors shut tight like sealed lips. Is anyone there? The question hung, thin and reedy, swallowed by the vacant space. Retreating to my desk, my hands betrayed me, trembling over the keys. Absurd, I chided myself, a misplaced tenant, an enthusiast of vintage fashion, yet the texture of the air had altered, grown dense, charged with an unseen pressure, the premonition of a storm brewing within these quiet walls. An hour dissolved into the mundane rhythm of arrival, the gurgle of the coffee machine, fragmented conversations, the insistent trill of telephones. The spectral image had begun to recede, blurring into the realm of overworked imagination. Until my monitor spasmed, a momentary blindness that snapped my attention upward. She occupied the threshold. Closer now. Her youth was stark, 20s perhaps, skin like alabaster, eyes dark pools reflecting nothing, yet somehow piercing everything. The fabric of her dress whispered without sound. A hand lifted, tentative, a gesture arrested midair, pregnant with unspoken words. My knuckles whitened, clamped to the chair's arms. May I assist you? The words felt clumsy, inadequate. Her lips parted, a silent "oh," before she turned, melting back into the hallway, her gown flowing like dark water around her ankles. Instinct launched me from my seat, the chair skittering backward. She moved with unnerving swiftness toward the building's elder heart, the East Wing. Our firm commands the 4th floor of the Bradbury Building, a grand edifice born in 1902. While the West Wing succumbed to modern renovation, the East retained its ghosts. Original hardwoods groaning underfoot, brass fixtures tarnished by time. Through the heavy fire doors separating present from past, I pursued. The temperature plummeted, a sudden, unnatural frost. My breath plumed, a visible impossibility in the September warmth of Los Angeles. She rounded a corner. I surged forward, only to find myself confronting a stark terminus. Blank wall, no egress, no portal, no conceivable escape. Just cold, impassive plaster beneath my outstretched palm, radiating an impossible chill. A vibration against my thigh, a jarring intrusion. Clara, meetin' in 5, donuts procured. I retreated, forcing measured breaths back toward the familiar hum of the renovated wing. The morning briefing unfolded in a haze, my focus fractured, gaze perpetually straying to the doorway. My coffee cooled, untouched. Later, I sought out Mr. Abernathy, the building's custodian of secrets and 30 years its steadfast manager. He presided over his domain from a small office, immersed in a crossword. "Mr. Abernathy," I began, the words feeling fragile. "A peculiar question, perhaps, but have you ever encountered anomalies in the East Wing?" His gaze lifted, bushy eyebrows arching over spectacles. "Define anomalies, Mr. Thorne." As the narrative spilled out, the antiquated dress, the ethereal glow, the vanishing act, Abernathy's initial skepticism yielded to a solemn gravity. He laid down his pen. "A fire," he murmured, leaning forward, "1906, ravaged the East Wing. Most escaped, but one." He rummaged within a deep drawer, extracting a weighty, leather-bound ledger, the building's genesis preserved. "For posterity," he explained, his fingers tracing lines across brittle, amber pages. "Ah, here we are. Vance, Eleanor, 24 years of age." He read from the record, his voice low. "Secretary to the law firm then occupying this floor. The newspaper accounts say she returned, seeking to retrieve vital documents." My throat constricted. What? What did she look like? Abernathy turned another page, revealing a faded photograph adhered to the brittle paper. A tremor returned to my hand. The woman, captured by the lens, wore the same high collar, the severe bun. No smile graced her lips, but her eyes, those dark, unsettling eyes, bored directly out from the past, identical to the ones that had held my gaze that morning. Work became an impossibility. The afternoon stretched, thick with unseen observation. Pockets of cold air materialized, then dissipated. My computer became temperamental. Files slammed shut unbidden, the screen flickered erratically, the cursor skittered with a will of its own. Around 3, seeking refuge in caffeine, I approached the break room. A distinct sound emanated from within, the staccato rhythm of manual keys striking paper. Click, clack, click, clack, an auditory relic. Pushing the door inward revealed emptiness, yet the sound persisted for a heartbeat longer before ceasing utterly. On a vacant table lay a single sheet of paper, absent moments before. Typed characters, stark against the white, formed a plea. "The files must be saved. Please help me find them." As I lifted the sheet, my fingers trembling, the ink began to sublimate, fading like breath on glass until only blankness remained. Night draped the city outside, but I remained anchored by unanswered questions. I delved into the company's digital catacombs, hunting for echoes of 1906 amidst digitized history. Midnight tolled somewhere beyond the walls. Suddenly, my monitor plunged into darkness. When it resurrected itself moments later, an unfamiliar folder lay open on the desktop. Vance Estate v. Western Railway, Cumbert. Inside resided scanned facsimiles of legal papers, all bearing the 1906 date. I began to read. Eleanor Vance's father felled in a railway catastrophe the previous year. The firm's lawsuit against the powerful Western Railway. A fortune by modern standards. Evidence, the documents whispered, of known track defects deliberately obscured. Crucial proof, scheduled for court the very day after the inferno consumed the East Wing. And Eleanor. The original papers lost forever. The case, consequently, dissolved. Justice denied. The air thickened, dropping degrees until my breath ghosted again. The familiar pressure materialized at my back. Slowly, I swiveled in my chair. Eleanor stood there, rendered with a solidity previously unseen. Clutched in her spectral hands was a shape reminiscent of an old leather folio, the kind used for ferrying irreplaceable documents. "You wanted the truth revealed," I murmured, the sound hushed in the unnaturally cold room. "For your father." A slow inclination of her head, her form wavering slightly like heat haze. "But the evidence, it burned," I countered gently. "It's gone." She shook her head, a silent negation, and gestured, a pointed finger, toward my screen. I turned back. New files were unfurling themselves, images I hadn't summoned. Internal railway memoranda, maintenance logs, inspection reports brushed aside. The lost proof, comprehension dawned like a slow sunrise. She hadn't died retrieving the originals. She had died trying to safeguard, or perhaps reveal the location of copies. Duplicates secreted away against just such a disaster. For 2 intense hours, I harvested the data, downloading, printing, securing the resurrected evidence. The railway company persisted, absorbed into a modern transit behemoth currently weathering scrutiny from environmental watchdogs. This century-old testament to negligence held startling modern relevance. As the final page emerged from the printer, the oppressive chill receded. The room breathed normally again. I turned. Eleanor lingered by the doorway, transformed. The unsettling luminescence had vanished. An aura of quietude enveloped her. A faint smile touched her lips, a single nod of acknowledgement. And then, she simply wasn't. The space she occupied was empty. By morning, copies were dispatched to investigative journalists at 3 leading publications. 2 weeks hence, the story detonated. Western Railway's descendant corporation saw its stock plummet by 30% overnight. Class action suits began to bloom like poisonous flowers. My early arrivals continue, the office quietude sometimes punctuated by a fleeting coolness, a flicker at the edge of sight. But the presence has shed its urgency, its faint sorrow replaced by something akin to peace. Occasionally, late at night, the ghost notes of an old typewriter drift from the break room. A gentle nudge, I've come to believe, toward home and rest. Last week, I relocated my office to the East Wing. Abernathy pronounced me mad. The antiquated climate control and protest and floorboards deter most. Yet, I feel an obligation to remain near this echo. Some narratives demand closure, however delayed. Justice, even spectral, requires witness. This morning, resting on my desk, was a pristine sheet of paper. As I watched, letters materialized briefly, typed in that familiar phantom font before dissolving back into the blank page. Thank you. That tireless relic breathes static, an unkillable murmur in the dead hours past midnight. Disconnect it, bury it deep in the gully. No matter. It materializes again, squatting in its accustomed place, whispering its low crackle. Such has been the rhythm since my arrival, since I came seeking quiet resolution on my father's forsaken acreage, and found, instead, this obstinate piece of junk refusing silence. The Monday I drove in, the air hung thick and heavy, afternoon sun pressing down. Procrastination had held me off too long. The ranch awaited its reckoning. Outwardly, time had barely brushed it. The main house slumped, paint flaking like sunburnt skin, porch steps groaning under imagined weight. The roof appeared intact, a deceptive solidity I instinctively distrusted. Knee-high weeds clawed at the porch foundations. Sweat beaded on my brow, the humidity a tangible presence, mingling with the faint, familiar tang of manure and decaying hay. An olfactory ghost of years I preferred entombed. My boots crunched first towards the barn, its structural integrity my primary concern. The old man had practically lived within those shadowed walls. His radio, perched on a scarred workbench, was a fixture of my memory. Faint strains of country music, the scent of sawdust and oil, his private world. Seeing it again stirred something unsettling within me. It seemed impossibly older, the plastic casing yellowed to the shade of old bone, its antenna crooked like a broken finger. Dust filmed its surface. I swiped a hand across it, a futile gesture. The tuning dial, caught fast between forgotten frequencies, yielded slightly to my touch. A burst of static hissed from the speaker. I traced the cord to the wall socket, pulled the plug free. Leaving the radio quiescent on a bench, I retreated to the house. Bags dropped inside, windows flung open to challenge the stale, trapped air. The place sighed neglect. No one had swept away the dust of absence. My sister, Alara, and I remained adrift on the question of the ranch's fate. Keep it? Sell it? For now, the burden of sifting through furniture, the cluttered garage, the accumulated detritus of a life, fell to me. She resided states away, a voice on a phone, available only if necessity screamed. Weariness settled deep in my bones. I drained half a water bottle from the cooler I'd brought, the cold liquid a brief shock. My phone displayed no bars, typical for this pocket of the world. Shrugging, I pocketed the useless device. That first night, silence reigned until the witching hour bled into the first hour of morning. I'd succumbed to exhaustion on the living room sofa, the bedroom unprepared. A faint crackling pricked the quiet, so subtle I dismissed it as phantom sound, the brain's static. But, listening intently, I discerned it. The unmistakable hiss, threaded with the ghost of a country melody. His station. I pushed myself upright, rubbing sleep from my eyes. Moonlight spilled through the window, silvering the dark room. The sound emanated from outside. Had I forgotten some other device? No, I was certain about the radio, the definitive unplugging. Barefoot, I padded onto the damp grass, heading for the barn. My heart hammered a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The heavy barn door slid open with a groan. The overhead bulb was dead. My phone's flashlight beam sliced through the gloom. There, on the workbench, the radio sat, its dial emitting a faint spectral glow, the needle twitching erratically. Low static whispered from its speaker. My gaze darted to the outlet. Empty. The cord lay coiled on the bench, utterly disconnected. A knot tightened in my throat. Residual charge, I told myself, a capacitor holding on to phantom power. Electronics were a mystery. Panic seemed premature. I picked up the radio, its plastic cool beneath my fingers. The knob clicked definitively off. Silence fell. Replacing it on the bench, I felt a tremor in my hands. I slid the barn door shut, the sound unnervingly loud, then retreated to the house, locking everything meticulously before forcing myself back toward sleep. Morning found me stiff-necked, my spine protesting the sofa's contours. After a rudimentary breakfast, I marched to the barn. Silence greeted me. The radio sat inert, unplugged. I seized it, carried it outside with grim purpose, and deposited it into a rusted, dented trash bin near the fence line. No repairs, no second chances. Its nocturnal transmissions were an unwelcome intrusion. The day demanded labor, purging the house, inspecting the fences. Hours blurred into hauling rubbish, sorting through boxes crammed with my father's unsentimental hoard. Old photographs, brittle papers, inexplicable objects he could never discard. Nothing resonated deeply. He wasn't a man given to keepsakes. Mid-afternoon, seeking a signal, I drove several miles down the pitted road to a familiar rise. Alara's voice came through, distant but clear. I outlined my plans, a few more days sorting. She agreed readily, then asked casually if anything felt off. Hesitation snagged my words. I recounted the radio incident, the unplugged static, the trash bin disposal. Had she visited? Moved it? Her denial was tinged with confusion. It's nothing, I assured her. Probably just tired. The call ended, leaving a residue of unease. Returning to the ranch, a premonition sent me back to the barn. My stomach clenched. There it sat, on the workbench, indistinguishable from before. Same film of dust, same bent antenna. I stared, breath held. Tentatively, I tapped its casing, lifted it. The knob turned. Static erupted. I clicked it off again, my hand now visibly shaking. Frustration warred with a rising dread. How could a discarded object reappear? I exited the barn, securing the door with a heavy, rust-pocked padlock scavenged from the workshop. It clicked shut with satisfying finality. I yanked the door twice, testing its hold. Trying to refocus, I swept floors, bagged more junk, cobbled together dinner. But my thoughts kept circling back to the radio. Had I confused the bins? Used one inside the barn? Stress, I reasoned. Loneliness playing tricks. Midnight approached. I retreated to my old bedroom, leaving a lamp burning against the oppressive dark. And, precisely around 1, it returned. The low fizz of static, the phantom tune weaving through it. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. Ignore it, I commanded myself. Let it fade. But the sound persisted, a tenacious whisper. The barn was locked. Could there be another radio? Slipping into pants, flashlight in hand, I gulped water to soothe a suddenly dry mouth and stepped outside. The padlock gleamed dully in the flashlight beam, secure. Pressing my face close to a gap between the weathered boards, I saw it. a weak internal luminescence from the workbench area. The static intensified against the wood near my ear. Sweat prickled the back of my neck. Fumbling with the key, I finally sprung the lock, sliding the door open just enough to peer inside. The radio's light pulsed faintly. A country melody, warped and slow, drifted beneath the static. A song I didn't recognize, words slurred, music distant, not like any broadcast I knew. I stepped inside, flashlight beam pinned to the device. My pulse throbbed, loud in my ears. As I approached, the radio crackled, the volume dipping slightly as if acknowledging my presence. My hand shot out, twisting the knob. Click, silence. I yanked the useless plug again for good measure, then carried the radio out into the night air. After relocking the barn, I located the old man's fire pit, a circle of stones used for burning brush. I set the radio on the packed earth beside it. Feeling a surge of desperate absurdity, I fetched a hammer from a nearby toolbox. The first blow cracked the plastic casing. Another popped the speaker loose. The dial tumbled off. Adrenaline surged, hot and fierce. I dropped the hammer, gathered the shattered pieces and tossed them into the cold pit. No kindling yet, but tomorrow, incineration. Wiping my forehead, the irrationality of my actions struck me. Yet the thought of seeing that radio whole again was unbearable. Back inside, I washed my hands, the tremor finally subsiding, and collapsed into an exhausted, troubled sleep. Dawn broke. My first thought, the fire pit. I hurried outside. Empty. Utterly, completely empty. No shards of plastic, no speaker cone, no tangled wires. I scanned the surrounding dirt, searching for signs of animal scavengers, finding nothing. A cold fist tightened in my chest. Back to the barn. Dread coiled in my gut as I unlocked the door. It was there, on the bench, whole, unblemished, no cracks, no missing dial, the antenna still bent at its familiar mocking angle. I stood, breathing raggedly, the morning sun warm on my back but failing to dispel the chill that radiated from my core. Hesitantly, I reached out, touched its surface. Cold. I turned the knob. Static hissed. I clicked it off. Backing away slowly, I locked the barn door one last time and retreated to the house, needing desperately to anchor myself to reality. My second call to Alara was strained. I tried to explain, prefacing it with apologies for sounding unhinged, the reappearance, the smashing, the impossible restoration. Was I sleeping? She asked gently. Exhaustion, maybe? Misplacing things? It's impossible, I insisted. I broke it into pieces. Her disbelief was palpable. Perhaps another radio? A hallucination? My temper flared. I snapped, then immediately apologized. The conversation ended, leaving me feeling profoundly isolated, adrift in absurdity. I walked the property for hours, attempting to clear my head, inspecting fences, noting repairs needed, trying to impose order on the tangible world. Could a neighbor be playing a cruel prank? The nearest homestead was over a mile off, occupied by an elderly man unlikely to engage in such elaborate torment. That night, I waited in the brightly lit kitchen, refusing sleep. Midnight passed. My eyelids grew heavy, but I fought unconsciousness. Then, at 1 o'clock sharp, the familiar whisper began. Distant static, insidious. Through the kitchen window, the barn stood dark, yet I knew. My heart gave a heavy thud. I remained seated, forcing slow, even breaths. After a long minute, I rose, grabbed the flashlight, and went outside. Cool grass under my boots, the scent of damp earth in the air. At the barn door, I listened. The static persisted, faint but undeniable. This time, I didn't unlock it. I just stood there, thoughts fragmented, a desperate yearning for silence, for normalcy, consuming me. How could it turn on? How could it mend itself? How could it keep returning? Eventually, defeated, I walked back to the house, shut the door, and lay down, staring into the darkness. Sleep evaded me, chased by the phantom crackle, the mystery of the radio's relentless cycle. A dull headache throbbed behind my eyes. Near dawn, oblivion finally claimed me. Waking felt like surfacing from deep water. A final check of the barn confirmed its quiet presence. The radio sat there, mundane in the morning light. I stared at it, a long, silent moment passing between us, then turned away. Enough. I began packing, stuffing clothes and essentials into my truck with hurried movements. Before climbing in, I paused before the barn door, padlock gleaming. A moment of indecision, then resignation. I left it locked. Driving away down the dusty track, a knot formed in my throat. I was escaping the ranch, but the radio remained, a permanent fixture, humming its static lullaby after midnight. No explanation offered itself, no rational thread to grasp. All I knew was its impossible persistence, its refusal to be discarded or destroyed. The crackle and the faint, ghostly country tune were imprinted on my mind. A break was necessary. I'd done my part. Alara could hire help for the rest. I had no more fight left for that radio's bizarre routine. Reaching the highway, I pressed the accelerator, watching the ranch shrink in the rearview mirror until it vanished. The static was gone from my ears, but not from my memory. The radio stayed behind, and I imagine it still whispers in the dark. And I have no intention of ever going back to find out. Let Ilara deal with it, if she dares. I am finished. Silence, ancient and profound, claimed the timberland until a twig, brittle with autumn, reported sharply beneath my boot sole. The sound tore through the night, arresting my motion. 15 years I'd walked these paths as a warden of the green deep, yet no amount of familiarity could brace a man for the abyss I was about to confront. Heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I stood frozen, utterly unaware that mere moments separated me from a struggle not just for the forest's sanctity, but for the breath in my own lungs. It was meant to be a night like any other. A customary sweep, checking for the ghost glow of forgotten campfires or the telltale signs of wanderers lost to the marked ways. The air, sharp with the coming cold, breathed scents of pine resin and the sweet decay of fallen leaves. Above, moonlight dripped through the dense canopy, painting the undergrowth with phantoms that shifted and writhed with every sigh of the wind. Hours had dissolved beneath the soft crunch of my boots on the forest floor when the first unnatural sound reached me. A low susurrus of voices, barely surfacing above the leafy rustle. My hand fell instinctively to the radio clipped at my hip, yet I paused. Campers, perhaps, lingering late. No cause for alarm, not yet. But curiosity, that persistent vine, tightened its grip. I drifted forward, my tread feather light on the moss and loam. Nearing a small clearing, the voices gained shape, shedding their ambiguity. These weren't the relaxed cadences of fireside chatter. No, these were clipped, urgent whispers, punctuated by a sound that sent ice sluicing through my veins, the unmistakable metallic snick of ordnance being chambered. night hunters, violators. We'd tussled with their kind before, but never this far into the sanctuary's heart. Hunkering behind the broad girth of an ancient oak, I risked a glance. The sight churned my gut. 5 men, dark shapes bristling with high-caliber rifles, clustered around the still form of a magnificent stag. Its antlers, a king's ransom on the shadowed market, were brutally shorn. The creature's eyes, glazed and vacant, seemed fixed on me, a silent accusation from the threshold of death. Again, my fingers sought the radio, trembling slightly this time. This needed reporting now. But before the transmit button could yield to pressure, another twig betrayed me, snapping underfoot. In the night's amplified stillness, the sound was a gunshot. 5 heads jerked towards the sound. Time stretched, thin and taut. Then pandemonium. "Who's out there?" A harsh voice grated, a rifle swinging violently in my direction. Thought evaporated. Instinct took hold. I ran. Branches lashed my face like whips as I plunged into the dense underbrush, the crashing sounds of pursuit terrifyingly close. My lungs burned, muscles screaming rebellion, but primal fear propelled me onward. A shot cracked the night air, the projectile splintering bark scant inches from my skull. I flinched, a reflex that cost me my balance on the treacherous terrain. Down I tumbled, rolling down a short, steep bank, a chaotic embrace of leaves and earth. Momentarily stunned, I lay gasping, the world a disoriented whirl. The hunters' voices drew nearer. Scrambling upright, I ignored the sharp protest from my side where rock had met flesh. Outrunning them was impossible. I needed refuge, a stratagem. My gaze snagged on a hollow log nearby, choked with decay. A desperate ploy, yet the only one offered. I launched myself towards it, wriggling into the tight, damp cavity, just as beams from flashlights sliced through the surrounding gloom. "He came this way," a gruff voice commanded. "Spread out. Find the bastard." I held my breath, willing myself smaller, pressing deeper into the rotten wood. Detritus clung to my sweat-slicked skin, an itchy shroud I dared not disturb. A cone of light swept directly over my hiding place. A silent prayer rose, bargaining with the shadows. "Nothing here," someone grumbled, unnervingly close. "Maybe circled back." "Don't matter," another retorted. "We gotta clear out, now, before more of his kind show." I listened, scarcely breathing, as their heavy footfalls receded. Luck, improbable and fragile, seemed to be mine. Yet caution held me fast. Minutes crawled past, each second an eternity measured in heartbeats. Only when the woods had reclaimed their silence for a full 10 minutes did I dare to ease myself from the log's embrace. Muscles shrieked in protest as I stood, stiff and cramped. Taking a moment to reorient, I realized panic had driven me further than intended. Their makeshift camp lay a mile or more back, opposite the direction they'd searched. My radio. I drew it out, praying the tumble hadn't silenced it. "This is Warden Thorne," I whispered, the words urgent. "Code 10 situation, Sector 7. Multiple armed hostiles, request immediate assistance." A burst of static, then a calm voice acknowledged, "Copy that, Thorne. Support en route. Your status?" Briefly, concisely, I recounted the encounter, voice hushed against the lingering possibility of eavesdroppers. Even as I spoke, a resolve hardened within me. letting them vanish into the night, their grisly prize secured, felt like a betrayal. But facing 5 armed men alone? Suicidal. "Maintain position, Thorne," the radio advised. "ETA on support is 20 minutes. Prudence screamed agreement. It was the logical, survivable choice, but 20 minutes felt like an eon. 20 minutes for them to melt away, taking their spoils. That couldn't happen. "Negative," I transmitted. "Tracking suspects. Moving east towards the old fire trace. Will maintain distance and relay position." Ignoring the crackled objections, I moved, pushing through the trees in the direction I'd last heard them. Adrenaline's fire was fading, leaving behind the ache of bruises and the strain of exertion. Each step was a minor agony, but indignation fueled me, a righteous anger for the violation inflicted upon the wild realm I guarded. Through the trees, I strained my ears, listening past the forest's own sounds. Soon, a low mechanical growl reached me. Engines. They had vehicles staged on the fire road. My pace quickened, heart resuming its frantic cadence. I had to reach them before they fled. Approaching the tree line's edge, 2 pickup trucks materialized from the gloom. The poachers were hastily loading gear, their voices low but sharp with argument. "Should have found that warden," one grumbled. "Bet he's called the whole damn force by now." "Shut your hole and load faster," another snapped. "We'll be ghosts before anyone gets close." I needed to stall them, buy precious minutes for the approaching backup. My gaze fell upon the truck's tires. An idea sparked. Reckless, dangerous, but necessary. Staying low, I crept around behind the vehicles. The men were preoccupied, focused on stowing their illicit cargo. My pocket knife felt small but purposeful in my hand. A deep breath, then I darted from cover. The first tire yielded with a soft, sibilant hiss. I moved to the second, then the third. I was sinking the blade into the fourth when a sharp cry erupted. "Hey, you! Stop!" I didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran, weaving a desperate pattern between the ancient trees as bullets tore through the air around me. The forest, this familiar labyrinth, was my sole ally now. I threw myself behind a massive boulder, lungs heaving. The sounds of pursuit were close, yet hesitant. They'd lost me in the darkness. "Come on out, Warden," one called, the tone falsely placating. "Let's just talk." As if I'd seen their conversation with the stag. While weighing my next desperate gamble, a new sound sliced through the night. Sirens. Not distant, but close, growing rapidly louder. My support had arrived, and by the sound of it, they'd brought everyone. Curses ripped through the air from the direction of the trucks, followed by the frantic sounds of scattering feet. Relief, potent and heavy, washed over me, leaving me sagging against the cold stone. It was finished. As flashing red and blue lights pulsed, flooding the clearing with artificial dawn. I stepped out from behind the boulder, hands raised high. Instantly, I was enveloped by fellow officers, their faces etched with concern, questions tumbling out. But my attention was fixed on the trucks, where evidence was being gathered, the poachers' plunder documented. Among the tagged items, I saw them. The magnificent severed antlers of the stag. Its death would not be meaningless. Its killers would answer for their crime. Guided towards an ambulance for assessment, a profound weariness settled over me. mingled with a quiet sense of vindication. The forest, for this night at least, was secure once more, and myself, my future patrols, I suspected, would carry a sharper edge, a heightened awareness. And that was right. Because guarding this wilderness, its creatures great and small, was never merely employment. It was a summons. And no matter the shadows, no matter the threat they concealed, I would always be here to answer. Barely 3 nights had settled over my new existence in the old Blackwood house on Hemlock Lane when the first furtive sounds began, a dry, insistent scritching. Initially, I waved them away, attributing the noise to the nocturnal sighs of an ancient dwelling, perhaps skeletal branches rapping against glass or the secretive scurry of rodents within the walls. Such are the expected accompaniments to inhabiting timbers steeped in years. But the morning revelation of viscous scars clawed deep into the front door's weathered paint banished all thoughts of benign explanations. A more formidable barrier was clearly required. My quest led me to the town's sole purveyor of hardware, a cramped establishment known simply as the Mercantile, breathing dust and the ghosts of transactions past. A tarnished bell above the door announced my entry with a discordant clang, releasing the dense perfume of old wood, rust, and something else, metallic and faintly unsettling. Aisles choked with the detritus of home repair, paint tins standing sentinel beside dormant gardening implements formed narrow canyons under a film of neglect. Behind a scarred counter stood a figure seemingly carved from the same aged timber as the shelves, perhaps nearing 70. His face a roadmap of years etched in shadow, hands gnarled monuments to tireless labor. His gaze, flat and incurious, lifted as I approached. "I'm looking for a deadbolt," I stated, aiming for an air of nonchalance I didn't feel. Something robust. The transformation was immediate, startling. His posture stiffened, the impassivity on his face solidifying into something akin to offense. "We don't vend those," he clipped out, "to newcomers." The words hung in the thick air. "I beg your pardon?" "Locks," he enunciated, each syllable a small stone dropped into silence, as if instructing an imbecile. "Not for those who haven't always belonged. Ordinance of the town." A disbelieving chuckle escaped me. "Surely you jest. I reside here now. I purchased the Blackwood property." His eyes, pale beneath weathered lids, narrowed perceptibly. "Residing here doesn't weave you into the fabric. Sundries, yes, nails, implements, necessities, those you may procure. But locks, we forbid them for outsiders." "Forbid? It's fundamental security. How can such a thing be forbidden?" He leaned across the counter, his weight resting on flattened palms, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rasp. "Attend closely. This place adheres to certain understandings. An understanding dictates that outsiders do not secure their doors against entry. It compromises our safety." A chill traced its way up my spine. "Your safety? What of mine?" "Enlightenment arrives eventually," he murmured, the softer tone paradoxically more menacing. "Or departure. Most choose departure." Retreating from the counter, my pulse hammered against my ribs. It had to be some elaborate, cruel prank, a hazing ritual for the uninitiated. Determined, I drove to the adjacent town, procuring the most formidable lock available, bolstering it with a door reinforcement kit. No archaic local superstitions would leave me vulnerable in my own home. That evening, wrestling with screws and strike plates, an undeniable sensation of being watched prickled the back of my neck. Repeated glances through the darkened windows revealed only the impenetrable velvet of night, yet the feeling persisted, unseen eyes scrutinizing my every move. Around midnight, the scratching resumed, amplified, no longer confined to the door but migrating, testing each window pane in succession, a methodical exploration of my defenses. I double-checked every latch, then huddled in the living room, a prisoner listening to the unseen entity methodically circling my sanctuary. Morning light exposed fresh wounds around the door frame, deeper this time, more frantic, and something new. A slip of paper thrust beneath the door, bearing 2 words in a spidery, trembling script. "Remove it." I crushed the note, discarding it with defiant anger. Fear tactics, nothing more. I wouldn't capitulate. But the siege intensified. Night after night, the scratching grew louder, evolving into a desperate, demanding clawing. More notes materialized. "Take the lock off. You were warned. It breeds danger." Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford, replaced by glaring lights and a body coiled tight, ready to spring at every creak and groan. Then the knocking commenced. Not the casual rap of a visitor, but a rhythmic, deliberate percussion against wood and glass, migrating from door to window and back again. It began with unnerving punctuality at 3 a.m., ceasing only with the first tentative rays of dawn. Peering out yielded nothing but empty shadows, yet I could hear movement, the rustle of presence just beyond the walls, accompanied by whispers, sibilant and indistinct, forever teasing the edge of comprehension. After a week besieged, frayed nerves unraveling, I surrendered and returned to the mercantile. Silas, the proprietor, registered my presence without a flicker of surprise. "Prepared to uninstall it?" he inquired, dispensing with pleasantries. "Why?" The word tore from my throat, raw with exhaustion and fear. Why is a simple lock forbidden? He emitted a long, weary sigh, the lines on his face deepening, aging him further in an instant. "Certain avenues must remain unobstructed. The town, it requires passage. It is simply the way of things here." "Passage to my home? For what conceivable reason?" He offered no answer, only that unwavering, faded stare. A heavy silence stretched between us before he spoke again. "You ought to depart, while departure remains an option." That night, the character of the assault shifted. The knocking anchored itself to my front door, relentless, insistent, demanding entry. The whispers swelled, coalescing into discernible words, chillingly clear for the first time. "Let us enter. We must come inside. Open the way." I sat slumped against the besieged door, tremors racking my frame. The expensive lock held firm, but the surrounding wood groaned, splintering under the onslaught. Whatever lurked outside craved ingress, and my defiance fueled its fury. Near dawn, an abrupt silence descended. I waited a full hour, heart pounding, before cautiously peering outside. The porch lay empty, undisturbed, save for a fresh carving etched directly above the lock. Final notice. My hands trembled so violently that morning, manipulating the screwdriver felt like deciphering an alien artifact. As the final screw relinquished its hold, a subtle shift in the air behind me made me spin around. Silas stood at the foot of my driveway, observing. "A prudent decision," he stated, his nod conveying a chilling sort of approval. "Rest will come easier now." "What is this town?" I whispered, my voice a ragged echo of sleepless nights. "What kind of place denies basic security?" He merely offered a thin, enigmatic smile before turning and receding down the lane. That night delivered a quietude more profound than any I'd experienced since my arrival. No scratching, no knocking, no insidious whispers. Yet this silence was infinitely more terrifying, pregnant with the absolute certainty that now nothing hindered entry. The door stood unlocked, an open invitation. The following day, the house went on the market. The realtor, a woman with eyes that seemed to hold the town's collective secrets, displayed no surprise at my hasty departure. It was, her expression suggested, entirely expected. When I inquired about other available properties, a peculiar look crossed her face. "There are none," she replied flatly. "Newcomers rarely stay. They all leave sooner or later. Those who resist, who insist on sealing things tight, they tend to leave the quickest." I retreated to a motel in the next town, awaiting the sale, which concluded with unnerving speed. The buyers, I learned, were locals, a detail that appeared to bring a quiet satisfaction to the community. On the day I loaded the last of my possessions, Silas materialized once more beside the moving truck. "Certain thresholds demand openness," he remarked, his voice low and gravelly. "Certain doors resist closure. Carry that knowledge wherever your path leads." I carried it. I fled to the anonymity of a sprawling city where locks are not questioned but mandated, where security systems hum their electronic reassurances. Yet, sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, a faint scratching seems to echo at my heavily secured door. I find myself wondering if they followed, if some unseen tether still connects me to that place. I wonder if, back on Hemlock Lane, new arrivals are even now wrestling with locks, learning the hard lesson that some communities operate under laws far older and more immutable than any written statute. And each night, before succumbing to an uneasy sleep, I perform the ritual, check the deadbolt, the chain, the window latches, all secure. Yet a persistent whisper lingers in the recesses of my mind, suggesting that perhaps, just perhaps, locks don't keep things out. Perhaps they only trap you inside with the fear. A clammy film clung to my skin when I woke, the first night after the painting arrived. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a dull throb echoing behind my eyes. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, its sudden glare making me squint. Unease, thick and nameless, coiled in my gut. I sat, gulping air, listening to the silence of the house for a full minute before swinging my legs out of bed. Padding into the living room, I found it submerged in gloom, the sodium street lamps outside casting everything in a sickly amber wash. No overt movement, yet a wrongness prickled the air, emanating from the shadowed corner where the inherited canvases leaned. They'd arrived unexpectedly, a dozen dusty relics from a relation so distant I hadn't known his name, let alone his face. A solicitor's letter informed me I, Elias Thorne, was the sole inheritor left standing. It felt peculiar, yet I'd consented. They came packed tight in a hulking wooden crate, swaddled in brittle straw and thick brown paper. Mostly landscapes, brooding forests, sun-starved fields, rendered in faded pigments. But one, a portrait, snagged my attention. A man, garbed in the stiff formality of centuries past, stared out from the canvas. Or rather, he would have stared had his face not been an abraded void. As if purposefully scoured, the paint around the eyes and mouth was a hazy smear, a deliberate blankness. The rest held its detail. The precise rendering of buttons on his coat, the intricate fall of a lace collar, the chiaroscuro suggestion of a dark chamber behind him. But the face, a cipher. It unsettled me from the moment I unwrapped it. I propped the portrait against the living room wall, intending a closer examination later, perhaps to discern if age or intent had caused the damage. Maybe it held some value, or perhaps it belonged in deep storage. Hanging it felt wrong, intrusive, so it remained on the floor, tilted against a low cabinet. No eyes, a mere suggestion of a nasal ridge. The mouth, a pale erasure. Looking at it produced a faint nausea. That night, sleep proved elusive. No footsteps echoed, no whispers disturbed the quiet, yet my mind conjured the blurred features on the canvas, imagining them sharpening into focus in the dark. I charted the cracks in the ceiling, closed my eyes tight, forced measured breaths. Around 3, oblivion claimed me, only to spit me back out moments later, drenched in tension. Barefoot, clad in pajamas, I returned to the living room. I stood before the portrait, flicked the overhead switch. Initially, nothing seemed altered. Then, leaning closer, a tremor ran through me. Were those faint etches near the brow line new? The barest intimation of form, a shadow suggesting bone structure beneath. I recoiled, dragging a hand across my mouth, and killed the light. Imagination, I told myself fiercely. Bed. Now. Morning light offered little clarity. I scrutinized the painting again. The face remained an incomplete horror, yet my focus shifted to its texture. A small, subtly raised patch resided where the left side of the forehead should be. It felt desiccated to the touch, yet possessed a faint sheen under direct illumination. My fingertips traced it, confirming a definite convexity, like dried pigment newly applied. Having no rational explanation, I shrugged, a gesture that felt hollow, and turned away. The day became a forced march through mundane tasks, errands, dusting, attempting to catalog the other canvases, dreary scenes of crumbling manors and overcast pastures. I handled them with care, mindful of potential antiquity, their blandness a stark contrast to the portrait's insistent void. By late afternoon, fatigue had settled deep in my bones. I stood in the kitchen doorway, nursing lukewarm coffee, gaze drifting unwillingly towards the living room. The portrait held its station. Silence reigned, broken only by the low thrum of the refrigerator. Sunset painted the room in strokes of lurid orange, igniting the canvas. I narrowed my eyes, stepped involuntarily closer. Something had changed around the mouth, a darkening, a concentration of pigment where before there was only the faintest smudge. I hoisted the heavy frame, carried it to the window, angling it into the dying light. Yes, the unmistakable suggestion of lips, a tentative, nascent outline. My pulse quickened. A wave of denial washed over me. I set the painting back down abruptly, turning my back on it, forcing the image from my mind. That evening, the television droned on low volume, a meaningless flicker in the periphery. My gaze kept snagging on the portrait, propped where I'd left it, it seemed, impossibly, to lean further into the room, more expectant. Around 11, I could bear it no longer. I rose, snatched a heavy gray throw from the sofa, and decisively draped it over the canvas. Relief washed through me as the disturbing blankness vanished. The fabric slumped, concealing the entire frame. Tomorrow, I resolved. I'd take it somewhere, an antique dealer perhaps, see if it could be exorcised or sold. I extinguished the lights and retreated to my bedroom, feeling marginally safer. Sleep came easier, though threaded with disquieting dreams of shifting paint. The following morning, coffee mug in hand, I entered the living room. The throw lay crumpled beside the coffee table. The painting stood exposed, facing me, and the face, it was no longer blank. Rudimentary outlines marked the positions of eyes, nose, and lips. Faded, hesitant, yet undeniably present. But the nascent face wasn't human, not quite. A distortion marred the mouth's curve, the corners lifted in a way that hinted at malice. The eyes remained incomplete sockets. Breath hitched in my throat. I set my mug down with a clatter, rubbed at my temples. A chill permeated the room. Though the windows were sealed tight, the air utterly still. Nothing else was disturbed. Only the painting. My palms grew slick. I wiped them on my trousers, fighting for composure. I retrieved the blanket. It felt ordinary, inert, and tossed it onto the sofa. I inspected the canvas surface again. Dry, utterly dry. Yet my eyes screamed betrayal. I recalled the previous day's faint suggestion of lips. Now it was a definitive curling shape, a sneer. Nausea churned. I had to move it, out of sight. I carried it gingerly into the spare room, deliberately averting my gaze from that emerging face, even the incomplete eyes feeling like an accusation. I shut the door firmly, leaning against it for a moment, breath coming fast, heart thudding. Breakfast was tasteless ash in my mouth, my eyes constantly darting towards the hallway. Throughout the day, I fought to ignore its presence behind the closed door, telling myself I was succumbing to shadows. I vacuumed with frantic energy, polished surfaces that didn't need it, anything to occupy my thoughts. But every so often, a faint creak would emanate from the direction of the spare room. The house settling, I insisted. The painting shifting, my fear whispered back. I focused on the vacuum's whine, the scent of disturbed dust. By mid-afternoon, the strain was unbearable. I found myself standing before the spare room door. It remained shut. The air in the corridor felt distinctly cooler here. My hand closed around the doorknob. It was icy cold. Turning it, I pushed the door open. The painting stood upright against the far wall. I hadn't left it like that. I distinctly remembered leaning it, face almost flat, against a small chest of drawers. Now it stood several inches away, angled slightly forward as if presented. A knot tightened in my stomach as I approached. The face more defined. The eyes now possessed discernible shapes, harboring narrow, nascent pupils. The nose had sharpened. The corners of the mouth stretched higher, the curve deepening into something akin to predatory mirth. It held a grotesque echo of my own features when forcing a smile, but hideously twisted. The fine hairs on my arms prickled. Blood pounded in my ears. With trembling hands, I reached out, pushed the painting flat against the chest again, ensuring it couldn't tilt. Then I fled the room, twisting the key in the lock, an instinctive, irrational act, yet it offered a sliver of security. Back in the kitchen, I gulped water, hands shaking, eyes fixed on the clock's slow crawl. What now? Discard it? Burn it? But there was no proof, nothing tangible. Just a painting, wasn't it? Night fell, and I illuminated every lamp in the house, bathing the hallway in stark light. I sought refuge in a mindless comedy show, the forced laughter grating. Around midnight, a distinct thud echoed from the spare room. I jolted, muting the television instantly. Silence pressed in, amplifying the frantic drumming of my own pulse. Slowly, cautiously, I moved down the hallway, each footfall seeming to creak in protest. I reached the locked door, pressed my ear against the cool wood. Nothing but the ragged sound of my own breathing. Steeling myself, I unlocked it. The painting lay face down on the carpet. No sign of disturbance to the furniture. I crouched, lifting it carefully by the edges. The face, revealed again, sent a jolt of pure terror through me. It now bore an unmistakable, albeit distorted resemblance to my own features, the cheekbones higher, the jawline uncannily familiar, the shape of the eyes mirroring my reflection. But the mouth was utterly wrong, stretched into a wide, predatory grin, with faint, sharp smudges suggesting pointed teeth. I blinked rapidly, trying to process the impossible. Panic surged. Covering it again felt futile. Against all reason, I decided I needed it where I could see it. I carried it back to the living room, my skin crawling with revulsion. Propping it against the wall, I stepped back. My own hunched, sweating reflection stared back from the dark screen of the television. And from the canvas, the figure seemed to watch me. Those nascent eyes, now holding a disturbing focus, fixed on mine. I swallowed, the sound loud in the quiet room. A terrible paradox. I couldn't bear to leave it alone, yet I couldn't stand to be near it. The thought of calling someone, a friend, anyone, surfaced, but died immediately. What could I possibly say? My phone felt leaden in my pocket. I pulled it out, scrolled numbly through contacts, then locked it again. The fear of sounding unhinged was, absurdly, still present. I approached the painting, hand outstretched, then snatched it back. Pacing, clenching and unclenching my fists. I switched off the television, plunging the room back into silence broken only by the refrigerator's hum. Another attempt at containment. My hands trembled as I retrieved the gray throw. I draped it over the frame, meticulously smoothing it down, ensuring every inch was covered. Then, from a kitchen drawer, I fetched a roll of packing tape. I applied strip after strip, securing the blanket's edges firmly to the back of the frame, a desperate, flimsy fortification. A shallow breath escaped me, a fragile moment of ease. I killed the living room light and retreated to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. In bed, I lay rigid, listening to the frantic thrumming in my chest, staring into the darkness until exhaustion finally dragged me under. Waking the next day was instant dread. The compulsion to check was unavoidable. I forced myself from bed, feet heavy on the floorboards. The living room felt colder than before. The blanket laid discarded on the sofa. The painting stood bare. Strips of tape littered the floor nearby, curled and torn as if impatiently ripped away. And the face, the eyes were complete now, fully formed. My eyes, the precise shade of hazel, the shape, the slight upturn at the corners, an exact, vacant mimicry of my own reflection, but devoid of warmth, of life. The mouth was slightly parted, revealing clearer, sharper hints of white where teeth should be. My heart plummeted. My hands felt distant, numb. I staggered back, shaking my head in mute denial. I lunged forward, grabbed the painting, ready to hurl it out the nearest window. But I froze. Staring into that face, I saw my own terror reflected in those horribly familiar eyes. My mouth was parchment dry. I fought to regulate my breathing, setting the canvas down again with trembling hands. Pacing. Uncertainty warred with panic. Pressure built in my chest, thoughts fragmenting. The garage? Should I lock it in the garage? But the thought of moving it again, touching it again, paralyzed me. I stood there for a long time, trapped in a staring contest with my own distorted likeness. The silence of the house pressed in. I couldn't live with this thing. I took another step back, stomach churning, sweat beading on my forehead. The grin on the canvas seemed to deepen, to widen. Looking away felt like a physical impossibility, yet staring was agony. I glanced towards the window, registering the indifferent daylight. Then my gaze snapped back to the portrait, profoundly unsettled by the unwavering intensity of its watch. I stumbled into the kitchen, poured a glass of water I couldn't drink, my hand shaking too violently. Setting it down, I took ragged breaths, trying to impose order on the chaos in my head. My heart refused to slow. The sensation of being watched was a physical weight, eyes boring into my back even though the painting remained in the other room. I forced myself back to the living room threshold. It hadn't moved, but those eyes, my eyes, tracked me. The horrific smile seemed etched deeper into the paint. My jaw clenched. Compelled, I approached it again. I reached out, brushed a hesitant finger across the painted surface. Still dry, yet the lines felt undeniably raised, solid, permanent. I snatched my hand back as if burned. My heart hammered against my ribs. Proximity was unbearable. A decision formed, sharp and clear through the fog of fear. Call someone, an art disposal service, an antique dealer, anyone. Get it out, now. My phone, battery critically low. I turned towards the bedroom to retrieve the charger, and that is where I remain, writing this, a leaden weight pressing down on my chest. Small sounds drift from the living room, faint scrapings, the subtle shifting of a frame against plaster. I don't want to go back out there. Not yet. The bedroom door is closed, but a chill seeps beneath it. My heart races, breath shallow and quick. Each creak from the hallway tightens the knot of dread. I expect another thud, another sign of its relentless animation. I cannot shake the feeling that the painting is waiting, that it wants me to look again, that it's exerting some unseen pull, drawing me back into its gaze. My thoughts scatter like startled birds, but one purpose remains starkly clear. I have to get rid of that thing. I will not spend another night under the same roof as it. My world had always possessed discernible edges, sharp corners defined by evidence and the reassuring weight of reason. I navigated by facts, anchored myself to explanations. Yet, the events that unfolded during that weekend immersion by the water defy any such mooring. They remain adrift in a sea of the inexplicable. Belief in spectral whispers or the campfire phantoms others thrilled to? Utterly foreign to my constitution. Until that night. Now, the boundaries of my certainty feel porous. It commenced with an entreaty from my friend, Reese. For weeks, he'd waxed lyrical about a newly acquired family refuge, a cabin secreted away on the lip of a vast, astonishingly clear lake. An escape, he promised, a place to sever the tethers of the everyday. The allure of timberland solitude, the prospect of casting lines into still water, the communion of firelight, the slow sip of spirits, proved irresistible. The pilgrimage there, however, stretched longer, burrowed deeper into the wilderness than anticipated. Asphalt surrendered to gravel, then to a serpentine dirt track that felt less like a road and more like an initiation into primordial quiet. As I finally rolled to a stop, the sun was already bleeding its final colors behind the peaks, stretching long, skeletal shadows across the lake's surface. There stood the cabin, embraced by conifers, its wooden pier extending like a finger into the placid expanse. The tranquility was profound, almost unnervingly so. Reese and a scattering of mutual friends greeted me from the porch, glasses already raised. That inaugural evening unfolded just as envisioned. Easy laughter unfurling around a blazing fire pit, narratives exchanged, the profound isolation seeping into our bones like a balm. No signal bars intruded, no digital clamor, only the rhythmic sigh of water against the shore and the sibilance of wind through the pines. But the second nightfall ushered in a current of the strange. The preceding day had been a study in serene inertia. We'd surrendered to the lake's cool embrace, sprawled upon the dock absorbing the sun, and luxuriated in the sheer absence of noise that such remoteness affords. As twilight painted the sky in bruised purples and fading oranges, we retreated indoors for sustenance. The mood remained buoyant, buoyed by shared contentment. No premonition cast a shadow. It was after the meal, amidst the comfortable lull, that Reese shifted the atmosphere. "Anyone here familiar with the Lady of the Lake?" he inquired, his tone subtly modulated, deliberately seeding the air with the potential for chills. Curiosity flickered across our faces, tempered with skepticism. A classic setup for a spooky yarn, I surmised, yet an unfamiliar gravity in Reese's gaze hinted at something more than casual invention. "She was from around here," he murmured, his voice dropping lower, drawing us closer. "They say, back in the 30s, maybe earlier, details get murky, lived somewhere along this shoreline. Legend has it she'd pace the water's edge after dusk, waiting for her husband, a fisherman, to return. One night, his boat came back empty, overturned near the far shore. They never found him." A hush fell upon the room, punctuated only by the companionable crackle and spit of logs in the hearth. Reese let the silence steep, his eyes briefly meeting each of ours. After he vanished, he resumed, folks started reporting sightings. Her, walking the banks, always just as night truly settled. They say she still searches, adrift on the lake, calling his name into the darkness. Sometimes, if you're out on the water late, you might just hear her. Intellectually, I dismissed it. Yet, the narrative, coupled with Reese's delivery and the cabin's profound isolation, had undeniably altered the room's texture. Goose flesh prickled along my arms. Just a story, I told myself firmly. Local color, designed to imbue a place with mystique. Surely that was all. Much later, when the cabin slumbered and the others were lost to dreams, an unseen tether pulled me back outside onto the dock. The moon hung high and luminous, bathing the lake in an ethereal, silvery light. The water lay impossibly still, a vast sheet of polished obsidian reflecting the celestial glow. Why I was drawn there, I couldn't say. Perhaps the residue of Reese's tale lingered, or maybe it was the sheer enveloping silence calling for witness. I stood for a long measure, gazing across the liquid mirror, attuned to the nocturnal symphony of crickets and distant owls. Then came the sound, a delicate, plink splash, subtle yet distinct in the profound quiet, as if the water's perfect tension had been momentarily breached. My eyes strained towards the source, scanning the immense darkness. The surface smoothed instantly, the moonlight skating across it without interruption. A fish leaping, surely, or a waterlogged branch succumbing to gravity. Yet the unease stirred earlier tightened its grip. I was pivoting to retreat to the perceived safety of the cabin when motion snagged my periphery. Near the opposite bank, just beyond the dock light's feeble reach. Initially, merely a flicker, a disturbance in the liquid silver. But as I held my breath staring, it coalesced, grew defined. Something wading, no, gliding, towards the lake's heart. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, convinced fatigue and suggestion were painting phantoms onto the night. But the apparition persisted, drawing nearer. A woman, waist deep now, her form stark against the shimmering water. Long, dark hair clung like seaweed to her shoulders and back. A garment, pale and flowing, a dress, undulated around her submerged legs, stirred by an invisible current. Her face remained averted, angled towards the lake's far, unseen reaches, head tilted as if listening intently for a sound only she could perceive. A frantic drummer took up residence in my chest. Impossible. A trick of light, moonbeams conspiring with mist rising off the water. Yet blinking changed nothing. She was undeniably there. And then she resumed her movement, a slow, inexorable wading into deeper water, each step measured, deliberate, imbued with a sense of ancient purpose, as if plumbing the depths for something lost. The lake swallowed her to her collarbone, then her shoulders, yet she pressed onward. A cry lodged in my throat, an offer of help, a question, but refused to surface. I stood paralyzed, clamped to the wooden planks, my mind a frantic scramble of disbelief and burgeoning terror. Just as she reached the lake's central, deepest expanse, where the bottom surely plunged far beyond reach, she paused. A protracted moment of stillness, head still canted, listening. Then, abruptly, without splash or struggle, she simply descended, submerged, vanished beneath the unbroken surface. I gasped, stumbling a half-step forward. The lake lay placid once more, perfectly smooth, reflecting the indifferent moon as if she had never been. No ripples spread outwards, no bubbles marked her passage. Nothing. Only stillness. I remained there for what felt like an eternity, eyes locked on the spot where she had dissolved, anticipating, dreading her reappearance. But the water held its secrets fast, calm and undisturbed. Finally, instinct took over. I turned, bolted back towards the cabin, the heavy thud of my heart echoing the frantic rhythm of my feet on the dock. The door slammed behind me, the lock snicking into place, guided by trembling fingers. Inside, the others slept on, oblivious. Sleep eluded me entirely that night. I sat, sentinel by the window, gazing out at the serene, deceitful lake, half convinced her silhouette would reappear against the moonlit water. But the shoreline remained desolate, the surface unmarred. Come morning, I offered no explanation for my pallor or haunted eyes. The woman, the impossible sighting, I kept it sealed within. A part of me desperately wanted to relegate it to dream, to illusion. Yet, as we gathered our belongings, preparing our exodus from that pocket of profound quiet, I couldn't banish the chilling conviction that the Lady of the Lake lingered still, eternally waiting. Perhaps Reese's story wasn't mere invention, and perhaps some places, however tranquil their facade, guard sorrows and secrets best left undisturbed. The silence I carried home was heavier than any suitcase, and its weight remains. The day had bled out, leaving the apartment steeped in the quiet hum of late evening when Elias sank into the familiar embrace of his sofa. Exhaustion pressed down, a physical weight. A quick voice note to Leo was all that remained, a simple task. He retrieved his phone, the screen casting a cool glow in the dim room. Thumb pressed record. A mere 20 seconds spilled out, a mundane apology for delays, a promise of details tomorrow. Nothing stirred. The apartment held its breath, windows sealed against the night, silence punctuated only by the low thrum of the ceiling fan. He was unequivocally alone. He tapped playback, a routine check for clarity, and then it surfaced. Beneath the tired cadence of his own voice, a ghost thread of sound, faint, insidious, a whisper clinging like static to his words. Elias froze, the phone suddenly heavy in his hand. Playback paused, screen inert. Street noise? Impossible. He was adrift in the living room center, far from the double-glazed windows. The television remained a black mirror. Silence reigned, save for the fan's hypnotic drone. Again, play. He leaned closer, straining, his own voice, weary but distinct. "Hey Leo, quick check-in. I'll get you that info tomorrow." And woven through it, that spectral murmur, an exhale of sound, perhaps, indecipherable, genderless. A warmth crept up his neck. Holding his breath, he listened once more. The whisper persisted, remote, as if emanating from behind drywall. 5 times he played it, each repetition seeding a tiny crystal of ice at the base of his skull. The apartment remained stubbornly silent, stubbornly empty. His gaze swept the room, the unlit kitchen yawning at the edge of his vision, the hallway steeped in shadow. Alone, utterly. A test was needed. Record. Testing, he spoke into the void, followed by a few beats of held silence. Stop, play, testing. Then absolute quiet. Nothing. Relief warred with unease. Perhaps fatigue was playing tricks. He navigated back to the original message. Play. The whisper breathed again, stubbornly present. He typed a quick message to Leo, attaching the audio file. Listen close. Hear anything odd? The wait for a reply stretched, thin and taut. Elias felt a flush of foolishness. He pushed himself off the sofa, flicked on the kitchen light, its sudden glare harsh. He paced, checked the window locks, secure. Third floor, overlooking a silent courtyard. No plausible source for clandestine whispers. His pulse, however, refused logic, drumming a slightly frantic rhythm against his ribs. He poured water, leaning against the cool laminate counter, trying to conjure rationality. Electronic interference, a glitch in the microphone's delicate workings, a speaker malfunction. Another trial, new recording. This is a second test. I'm alone, just testing the phone. A deliberate pause. Stop, play, crystal clear, his voice solitary and stark, no phantom undertones. He returned to the sofa, placing the phone on the coffee table as if it were an unpredictable artifact. He cued the first message again. The whisper clung, undiminished. Headphones. He retrieved a pair from a drawer, plugging them into the jack, isolating himself with the sound. Play. The whisper gained a chilling intimacy, seeming to bypass the ear canal and manifest directly within his skull. Still unintelligible, yet textured now with the faint sibilance of breath, as though someone stood just beyond his shoulder, murmuring secrets too low to grasp. He spun around. Empty air. The fine hairs on his forearms prickled upright. A restless energy propelled him through the apartment. Bedroom check, bathroom, closet door pulled wide, nothing, no one. He lived alone, no roommate lurked in forgotten corners. He tried to bulldoze the unease with normalcy, fixing a sandwich he didn't desire, the bread dry in his mouth. He ate, standing in the kitchen, eyes scanning the familiar, suddenly alien landscape of his home. The refrigerator hummed its bass note. The overhead light emitted a faint buzz. Outside, only the distant sigh of a passing car. Nothing more. His phone vibrated against the counter. Leo. A text. Yeah, something's definitely there. Weird background noise. What the hell is that? Elias's stomach clenched. Not imagined then, real enough for another to hear. No idea, he typed back. Was totally alone. Leo responded with a voice message. Elias hit play. Man, that's seriously creepy. Leo's voice crackled, steady but edged with unease. Sounds like someone whispering right there. You sure nobody else was around? He had to replicate it. Same spot on the sofa. Fan switched off for absolute silence. He recorded the original phrase, "Hey, Leo, quick check-in. I'll get you that info tomorrow." Same tone, same cadence. Stop. Play. Only his voice echoed back, clean and solitary. He tried again. A third time. Nothing but his own unadorned words. He navigated back, inevitably, to the first recording. Play. The whisper persisted, immutable, seemingly fused to that specific digital moment. He attempted to edit the file, zooming in on the waveform, hoping to isolate the anomalous sound. Replay after replay, phone pressed tight against his ear, his own pulse thudding in counterpoint. He strained, desperate to decipher a single syllable from the soft, sibilant hiss. Unmistakably speech-like, yet refusing form. A bead of sweat traced a path down his spine. His shirt felt damp against his skin. His breathing had quickened. He walked to the front door, peered through the peephole. The corridor outside lay dormant under the low-wattage glow of the safety lights, silent. He unlatched the deadbolt, eased the door open, stepped onto the worn carpet of the hallway. Empty. He stood, listening, enveloped by a profound stillness. Retreating inside, he secured the lock. He checked every room once more, a futile ritual. Finally, he stood in the center of his bedroom, the phone cool in his palm. He raised it, thumb hovering over the record icon, the silence of the room vast and expectant. He recorded another message there, just his voice cutting through the quiet. Necessity, more than desire, guided me to this apartment some months past. The rent, a whisper compared to the area's usual roar. Its configuration struck me as utterly conventional, barring a single glaring eccentricity. A protracted hallway sheathed on both flanks by floor-to-ceiling mirrors. My first passage through it conjured images of a carnival funhouse, a disorienting corridor where my own form replicated infinitely, a receding cascade of selves diminishing into the reflected distance. A tremor of unease registered, faint but distinct, yet I dismissed it as a quirk of avant-garde design, signing the lease with the blithe assumption that familiarity would breed indifference. In those initial weeks, the mirrored passage scarcely impinged upon my awareness. My work demanded long hours, depositing me home in a state of profound exhaustion. I'd traverse the hall with barely a glance, collapsing into bed, the reflections relegated to the periphery. Occasionally, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a phantom twin, triggering that reflexive jolt, the mind startled by unexpected motion. Just my own image, I reasoned, my senses playing tricks in fatigue. I waved it away. One evening, a sharp, penetrating cold had settled into the building, a common caprice of its antiquated heating system. I remember the chill biting at my skin as I shed my coat, tossing it onto the living room sofa before turning towards the bedroom. It was then I observed the mirrors. They were filmed over, clouded by a thin uniform vapor. My breath wasn't the cause. I held it, watching intently. No steam rose from a kettle, no shower ran, no window stood ajar admitting damp night air. The phenomenon was simultaneous across every panel. I stood arrested, scrutinizing the glass, searching for a rational source for the pervasive mist. Through the haze, indistinct shapes began to coalesce. At first glance, simple smudges perhaps, yet their contours possessed a definition that defied random condensation. Drawing nearer, the lines resolved into complex figures, reminiscent of tribal markings or intricate sigils, though their clarity remained elusive. My eyes strained. Each blink seemed to erase the patterns, only for them to reappear, subtly altered, shifted, upon reopening my lids. Minutes slipped by as I tried fruitlessly to fix one configuration before it dissolved. A frantic tempo began in my chest, and despite the ambient chill, perspiration beaded on my brow. I wiped it, feeling the cold dampness of my skin beneath. Impulsively, I reached out, intending to swipe a clear patch with my sleeve. The moment my fingers contacted the surface, I encountered a peculiar resistance, akin to pressing against a membrane of dense, unseen ice. It wasn't frozen, not truly, yet the glass lacked the slick give of simple moisture. My fingertips dragged. Pressing harder, my nails scraped audibly against something unyieldingly solid beneath the mirrored illusion. I recoiled, snatching my hand back as if burned, my pulse hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The urge to investigate further evaporated, replaced by a primal need to retreat. I backed away, hurrying towards my bedroom, the unnerving sensation of unseen eyes fixed upon my retreating form, prickling the nape of my neck. That night inaugurated a series of deeply unsettling dreams. In the first, I stood immersed in a thick, cloying fog that rendered visibility almost negligible. The air clung, cold and damp, to my skin. Beneath my feet, the ground yielded like sodden concrete. Then, shadows materialized from the white obscurity, not whole figures but disembodied forearms and hands, groping, grasping at the empty air around me. Panic seized me. I tried to flee, but my limbs felt leaden, mired in some invisible, viscous slush. The hands drifted closer, brushing against my arms, my shoulders. A raw terror constricted my chest, my breath catching, shallow and rapid. Just as one spectral hand closed firmly around my wrist, I awoke with a strangled gasp, drenched in sweat. Darkness still held the room. My sheets were twisted into ropes around my body, and my heart throbbed painfully, a frantic drum against my sternum. It took long moments for the panic to subside, for my breathing to even out. The following morning, traversing the corridor, I found the mirrors pristine, utterly clear. Their surfaces gleamed with innocuous normality. Had it not been for the visceral memory of the previous night, the chilling resistance under my fingertips, I might have convinced myself it was all just a particularly vivid nightmare. Yet, as dusk bled into evening, I checked again. Patches of that strange mist had returned, blooming irregularly across the glass. Within them, the faint, intricate patterns reappeared, different from before, yet bearing the same unsettling signature of lupin lines and curved, unfamiliar shapes. A cold dread snaked down my spine. I fought against the rising panic, attempting to rationalize. Peculiar condensation patterns, temperature differentials within the old building's structure. But no logical explanation accounted for the precision of these ephemeral glyphs, their frustrating tendency to shift and fade like living entities glimpsed under water. Armed with a cloth and glass cleaner, I attempted to cleanse one panel. The fabric immediately snagged, catching as if on a bird or roughened patch, despite the smooth appearance. Applying more pressure elicited a grating, scratching sound that set my teeth on edge, a deeply unpleasant noise like scraping ice from a frozen windshield. My hand began to tremble uncontrollably. I stepped back, lowering the cloth, abandoning the effort. A knot tightened in my stomach as I registered the shallowness of my own breath. In the ensuing nights, I began actively avoiding the corridor after dark, hurrying directly to my bedroom, eyes fixed resolutely on the floorboards. Yet, the apartment's layout rendered this strategy imperfect. The mirrored passage was unavoidable, a necessary conduit. Even with averted eyes, I became acutely aware of imagined movements in my peripheral vision. Worse, sometimes I'd risk a glance, only to perceive my own reflection lagging or anticipating my motion by a fraction of a second. An arm lifting slightly ahead of mine, a head turning a beat too slow. It was a subtle, maddening dysynchrony, like watching an imperfect mimicry, and each instance sent ripples of goose flesh across my skin. Sleep offered no respite. The nightmares intensified, relentlessly revisiting the suffocating fog, the disembodied hands, the sensation of being pulled into some unseen abyss. I often woke gasping, sometimes crying out, my voice raw in the mornings, dark circles blooming beneath my eyes. The thought of confiding in anyone, a friend perhaps, brought a flush of embarrassment. How could I articulate this creeping horror? That my hallway mirrors seemed sentient, haunted. Contacting the landlord felt equally futile. Dismissal, accusations of an overactive imagination, or mundane inquiries about humidity seemed the most likely responses. Approximately 2 weeks after the phenomenon began, a desperate idea formed. From a local hardware store, I procured a small handheld steamer. My plan: to see if direct, concentrated steam might force the patterns into clearer view, or perhaps reveal something more about their nature. I waited until deep night, around 11, extinguishing all lights save for the dim glow spilling from the living room lamp. I approached the corridor. The mirrors displayed their usual patchy nebula. My hands shook as I plugged in the steamer, its low hum the only sound in the pregnant silence. Raising the nozzle to the nearest panel, I directed the plume of hot vapor onto the glass. It billowed, adding its own layer of condensation. Initially, nothing changed. Then, after several seconds, I perceived faint, crack-like lines spiderwebbing through the original mist beneath the steam, branching, intricate fissures spreading across the surface. My heart leaped. They seemed to writhe, to move with purpose just beneath the glass. Stumbling backward in alarm, I knocked over a small end table behind me. A lamp crashed to the floor, the bulb shattering, plunging the hallway into absolute darkness. I scrambled frantically for the wall switch, fingers fumbling against the plaster. Light flooded the corridor once more. The mirror looked ordinary again, merely steamed over now. The disturbing lines vanished. I hauled myself upright, adrenaline surging, my shoulders rigid, jaw clenched tight. The thought of moving out became insistent, obsessive. But the security deposit was substantial, and breaking the lease represented a financial blow I couldn't absorb. Perhaps ignorance was the only viable path. If I simply refused to engage, stayed clear of the mirrors after sundown, maybe the phenomena would remain contained, ignorable. But the nightmares persisted, and the corridor remained an inescapable artery of the apartment. 2 nights ago, I sought refuge on the living room couch, hoping distance might grant peace. Around 2 in the morning, a faint sound roused me, a low, dry scraping emanating from the hallway. My muscles seized. A clammy chill washed over my skin. Sitting bolt upright, I stared towards the dark maw of the corridor entrance. Dim street light filtering through the window cast a spectral sheen on the distant mirrors. My pulse thundered in my ears. Every instinct screamed against entering. Yet the sound, now ceased, demanded investigation. Rising cautiously, I crept to the threshold and looked. My own silhouette stared back, familiar yet alien in the gloom. Then I saw it, a distinct patch of fog coalescing near the center of the right-hand mirror, already resolving into those familiar, disturbing lines. I edged closer, compelled to see the pattern, but something else arrested my attention, freezing the breath in my throat. My reflection's head turned slowly, deliberately, to face me fully, before I myself had moved. I stood paralyzed. Then, horrifyingly, I watched my reflection lift its hand, pressing it flat against the glass, palm outwards. My own arms hung limply at my sides. A surge of pure, visceral panic sent me staggering backward. I fumbled blindly for the living room light switch, flooding the area with harsh illumination. Instantly, the reflection snapped back into perfect synchronicity, mirroring my terrified posture precisely. The fog patch remained, though the pattern within seemed fainter now, less defined. My heart felt dangerously overwrought. My own ragged breathing filled the sudden silence. My legs threatened to buckle. I didn't go to work yesterday. The encounter left me profoundly shaken. I spent the day adrift in the living room, mind racing, desperately seeking a strategy. Covering the mirrors seemed the most direct approach. I unearthed duct tape, an old bed sheet. The corridor's length, the mirror's height, felt daunting. I managed to affix the sheet over perhaps 2 panels before an intense feeling of presence materialized directly behind me. I spun around. The hallway stretched empty, populated only by my multiplied, watching reflections. Nerves shredded, trembling fingers fumbling with the tape, I realized I couldn't continue alone. The tightness in my chest became unbearable. Abandoning the half-finished task, I retreated once more to the relative safety of the living room. And here I remain, chronicling this ordeal. Night has fallen again, deep and absolute, yet sleep is an impossibility. Fear holds me captive, awake. My gaze drifts constantly to the corridor's entrance. Even with the living room lights blazing, the mirrors possess a distant, unnatural gleam, like sheets of black ice. My mouth is parched, my hands cold. Every incidental creak of the building, settling pipes, the distant hum of the elevator, makes me flinch. What next? The urge to flee, to abandon everything and run, wars with the stark reality of my finances. I am anchored here, trapped until a solution presents itself. The thought of shattering the mirror's surfaces, tempting and terrifying. The cost of replacement would be ruinous, and the consequences of unleashing whatever resides within them, unthinkable. A knot of nausea tightens at the prospect. For now, vigilance is my only recourse. I sit, watching the threshold. My head aches with tension and lack of sustenance. My nerves feel like frayed wires. The image of my reflection moving independently, its hand pressed against the glass barrier, is seared into my memory, refusing to fade. Powerlessness washes over me. Each time I contemplate the necessary passage down that corridor to reach my bedroom, my heart accelerates, my breathing hitches. Will it escalate, or simply repeat, night after night, this cycle of dread? I am terrified to discover the answer, yet trapped in the experiment. This apartment, this prison of reflections, is all I possess for the moment. My next desperate thought is containment. Barricading a corridor, perhaps stacking furniture, anything to block it from view to seal it off. I crave oblivion from those surfaces. I wish I could dismiss all this as delusion, a stress-induced fantasy, but the evidence of my senses is undeniable. The tangible resistance of the glass, the fleeting sigils in the mist, the impossible autonomy of my own mirrored image. There are no explanations, only the mounting certainty of something deeply wrong. All I can hope for now is to endure this night without succumbing to the nightmares, without the mirrors intensifying their silent summons. That is the extent of my current ambition, to remain calm, bathed in artificial light, averting my gaze from any reflective surface, waiting from this precarious distance for the reprieve of dawn. But the night stretches long, and I feel with a chilling certainty that the mirrors are not yet finished with me.